What if every time you gave in to a stubborn habit or failed a diet or spent 3 hours just mindlessly scrolling on your phone, what if it had absolutely nothing to do with willpower?
Which is such a crazy thought, right? Because that is all we're ever told.
Exactly. Welcome to this deep dive. As a curious learner, you're probably used to absorbing all this external information to understand the world, prepping for a meeting or just trying to stay sharp. But our mission today is entirely internal.
Yeah, we are pulling from a really fascinating piece of source material today called A Somatic Inquiry into Desire and Attachment. And the goal here is to completely reframe how you understand your own cravings.
Right. We are tossing out the traditional view entirely. We aren't looking at desire or attachment as moral failings or religious sins or some sort of spiritual weakness or lack of discipline.
No, not at all. We are looking at them as highly mechanical, physical, and biological processes.
Yeah. Like when you strip away the moral judgment and the societal shame that usually surrounds this conversation about habits, you're just left with pure mechanics. You can finally see desire as a form of internal self-regulation and internal repair. Repair, right. So it's an attempt by the physical organism to solve a physical problem,
Exact.
which changes everything about how we approach the things we want to change in our lives.
Mm.
If you're listening right now and wondering why certain habits feel, literally impossible to break, or why the standard advice to just buckle down and use more willpower consistently fails you, this text provides a blueprint for what is actually happening under the hood.
And to see how these desires trap us, we really have to look at the anatomy of a reaction. The source makes this very clear distinction between a biological trigger and the psychological trap that follows it.
Okay, let's break that down.
So the very first reaction you have to any stimulus in your environment is completely natural and automatic. I mean, you are a biological organism interacting with a dynamic world. As long as there is a physical structure called a self, a response to external input is going to happen.
Like you see an object or you hear a notification, ping.
Right, or someone just looks at you a certain way and your nervous system reacts. You might feel a slight tension, a magnetic pull toward something, maybe a subtle aversion, or a tiny flutter in your stomach.
Mm.
And the text really emphasizes that this initial biological reaction does not need to be judged as good or bad.
It's just biology doing its thing. I mean, think of it like this. It's like accidentally touching a hot stove.
Oh, that's a good way to look at it.
Right. The physical flinch pulling your hand back is totally automatic. It's a mechanism designed to keep you safe. That flinch is the first reaction, and it's harmless.
Yeah, the flinch isn't the problem.
Exactly. The actual problem, the place where we get stuck, isn't the flinch. The problem is what we desperately do next to try and soothe the lingering, painful burn left behind.
And that lingering residue is the core of the whole issue. Because after that initial biological reaction to a stimulus, what often follows in the body is a felt discomfort.
Like a physical sensation.
Yeah, it might manifest as a sense of lack, a restless energy, an emptiness, or just a subtle internal pressure in the chest or stomach. The sense of self basically feels slightly destabilized by whatever just happened.
Right.
And this leads to what I think is the most radical redefinition in this text. In the somatic view, desire isn't actually a statement of, I want this specific object.
Hmm.
Fundamentally, desire is the body saying, I want to get rid of this bad internal feeling.
Wow. So the craving isn't actually about eating the entire bag of chips.
No.
Not at all.
The craving is the organism experiencing an internal restlessness, like a subtle agony or instability, and wanting to erase that feeling by any means necessary. The chips are just the lever you pull to change the internal temperature.
Yes, the object of desire is entirely secondary. It is just a tool used to alter an uncomfortable body state. We are talking about self-maintenance here.
The organism senses a dysregulation, like an unpleasant frequency vibrating in the nervous system, and it immediately searches its environment for a way to turn that frequency off.
And the primary strategy we use to turn that frequency off is this coping mechanism the source calls overwriting.
Overriding.
It's such a mechanical term because the internal state, that anxiety, that emptiness, that subtle compression, feels so inherently bad to the nervous system, we try to overwrite it with a different, louder stimulus. We use a strong sensory or emotional input to literally drown out the subtle, uncomfortable internal state.
And the examples the text provides go far beyond the obvious ones, like compulsive eating, drinking, or online shopping.
Right, the stuff we normally think of.
Exactly. Overriding can actually be highly subtle and socially acceptable. It can look like seeking approval from peers or depending really heavily on a romantic partner to provide a constant sense of stability. It could even take the form of using correctness or righteousness to stabilize yourself.
Using anger to change your body state is a perfect example of this.
Oh, yeah.
Like you might feel an underlying sense of anxiety or vulnerability, which feels very fragile and groundless. So you instinctively pick a fight online or snap at a coworker because the physiological sensation of anger feels much more powerful, solid, and grounding than anxiety does.
Right.
You are literally overriding the somatic feeling of vulnerability with the somatic feeling of rage.
Or consider someone who covers up a pervasive feeling of emptiness with a really complex, rigid spiritual narrative.
Oh, no.
Or someone who throws themselves into extreme workaholism.
Which society loves, by the way.
Oh, completely. From the outside, society might reward the workaholism or praise the spirit of devotion, framing it as this pursuit of excellence or enlightenment. But internally, mechanically, it is a desperate form of repair.
Yeah.
The person is trying to overwrite a fundamental sense of lack. The driving force is simply, I cannot settle internally unless I am doing this specific thing.
But, and this is where it gets tricky, if overwriting is just a temporary patch, a sensory distraction to mask a deeper signal, it inevitably leads to a structural problem, doesn't it?
It does.
Because the underlying cause of the discomfort hasn't actually been addressed. You eat the chips, you win the argument online, you get the promotion, and for a brief window, the discomfort is masked. You feel settled.
Right. The alarm turns off for a second.
Exactly. But the root structure remains completely unchanged. So the bad feeling inevitably returns.
And because the feeling returns, the overwriting process has to be repeated. Through sheer repetition, overwriting stops being a temporary, occasional response and hardwires itself into the nervous system as your standard default mode of operating.
Wow.
It literally becomes the only pathway the brain knows for regulating distress.
And it builds a tolerance. At first, a small dose of external validation, like a single compliment, was enough to settle the internal anxiety for a week.
Right.
Then the nervous system adapts to that level of input. Suddenly, you need constant, overwhelming approval every single day just to maintain the exact same baseline of feeling okay. The method becomes completely fixed in your behavior, but it yields diminishing returns.
Which forces the organism to seek higher and higher intensities of the overriding stimulus.
Well, let me play devil's advocate here for a second on behalf of the listener, because this might sound a bit harsh to someone who uses these small comforts just to get by.
Sure, go for it.
I mean, isn't seeking comfort just human nature? If overwriting works temporarily to keep us functioning, to help a person get through a brutally stressful week at work without breaking down, why is it framed as such a danger? Isn't it just a normal survival strategy?
That's a great question. And the source is actually very careful to validate that exact point. Overriding is not framed as an evil act.
Okay, good.
Yeah, in many stages of a person's life, it might be an absolutely essential defense mechanism. Human beings simply cannot face the entirety of their internal pain or trauma or instability directly all at once. The nervous system would be completely overwhelmed and just unable to function.
So it operates as a psychological and physiological shock absorber.
Exactly. When a profound discomfort cannot be held as it is, overriding functions as a bridge. It keeps the organism moving forward. The danger is not that you use a shock absorber. The danger is that if this temporary bridge becomes the permanent and only tool you have for dealing with reality, it mechanically guarantees a dead end.
Because eventually, the shock absorber wears out completely. The tolerance reaches a threshold where the dose simply cannot be increased anymore.
Right.
The source notes that when overwriting reaches these ultimate limits, people break down. And what's fascinating here is that while everyone breaks down in their own unique way based on their preferred tool, the underlying architecture of the breakdown is identical.
One person might collapse into complete apathy, completely unable to get out of bed. Another might fall into a severe, destructive romantic dependency. Another might face adrenal burnout from extreme workaholism or the endless, exhausting treadmill of self-improvement.
Right, the surface forms look entirely different.
But the mechanical reality is the same. The old stimuli just stop working. The pleasure that used to distract you no longer registers. The achievements that previously made you feel solid suddenly feel hollow.
And when people hit this specific breaking point, the usual advice society offers is to endure. We are told to push through it or to just let it go or to suppress the desires through sheer willpower.
Right.
But the source argues that these solutions are mechanically destined to fail.
Oh, completely. If you look at the internal physics of the situation, telling someone to just endure makes no sense. Consider the layers of tension operating inside the person. Layer 1 is the foundational underlying internal discomfort. the raw pain or anxiety.
Mm-hmm.
Layer 2 is the intense, naturalized urge to overwrite that bad feeling with their specific habit, which is screaming at them to take action.
So the system is already highly pressurized. It's like a boiling pot with the lid rattling.
Exactly. If you then introduce a command to suppress this urge, you're not removing any pressure from the system. You're actively adding a third layer of tension.
Wow.
You're introducing the internal friction of suppression on top of the urgent craving, which is already sitting on top of the original somatic pain. You are taking a system that is already redlining and maximizing the internal friction until it fractures.
So if someone successfully white knuckles their way through a diet or a craving for a month, they haven't actually solved the structural problem at all.
Not at all.
They've just marshaled enough temporary energy to hold the lid down on the boiling pot. They've added more pressure to the system, which virtually guarantees an eventual explosion.
The core issue remains entirely untouched by white knuckling. And this brings us to a really vital concept in the text.
Yeah.
Desire is state dependent. It is not a fixed character trait.
Right.
It is not a measure of whether you have a weak or strong moral constitution.
Let's break down that mechanism for the listeners. State dependency means that your desires are entirely reliant on the specific condition of your internal environment in any given moment.
Yes. If your internal state is highly turbulent, like if your nervous system is dysregulated, full of friction, noise, and unresolved tension, then the urge to overwrite is going to feel absolutely unavoidable. The body will demand it as a matter of survival.
The object of your craving will look incredibly magnetic.
Right. But if you transition into a different physiological state, a calm, regulated state where the internal background noise is very low, that exact same object, that exact same trigger will not produce an intense attachment.
The chocolate cake looks entirely different to a nervous system in panic than it does to a nervous system at peace.
Exactly.
You haven't conquered the desire for the cake through the sheer force of your will. The internal conditions that amplify the desire simply aren't present in that calm state.
And if that turbulent internal state returns tomorrow, the exact same intense craving will return right along with it.
Yeah.
This is why viewing habit change as a sequence of moral victories or failures is biologically inaccurate.
Yeah.
It's just a state-dependent reaction. If the internal temperature hits a certain degree, the system automatically reaches for the cooling mechanism.
This presents a massive shift in perspective, but it also raises a really difficult question. If willpower is off the table, and if suppression just adds more pressure to an already overloaded system, and if overwriting is a temporary patch that eventually leads to a breakdown.
Yeah, where does that leave us?
Exactly. How does a person actually change? How do we break this loop?
So the source introduces a concept here that might challenge the listener's desire for a step-by-step action plan. It highlights the profound element of luck.
Luck, which initially sounds incredibly discouraging. It implies we have no agency.
It does, which is why it requires clarification. Because luck in this context does not mean pure cosmic randomness or a roll of the dice. It refers to the uncontrollable convergence of specific conditions around a person's internal structure. It's really about the precise timing of internal readiness.
The text mentions the phrase, "when the time comes." It's a phrase you hear thrown around in a lot of spiritual or philosophical traditions, and it usually sounds vague, almost mystical, like you're just waiting for lightning to strike.
Right.
But the somatic perspective redefines it mechanically.
When the time comes refers to the exact, specific biological and psychological moment. Your internal structure is finally capable of receiving and processing change. I mean, think about your own life. Have you ever received a piece of advice or read a book and you just rejected it? Or worse, it felt like an oppressive demand, just another layer of pressure.
Oh, definitely.
And then maybe 3 or 4 years later, you encounter the exact same advice, the exact same words, and suddenly it is profoundly life-changing. It clicks perfectly into place.
The words themselves didn't change at all. My internal structure changed.
Exactly. The physical and psychological condition of your nervous system shifted enough to allow the information to be absorbed rather than repelled. If the timing isn't right, if the internal noise is too loud, even the most accurate, objectively helpful truth will just bounce off the armor or be interpreted as an attack.
Wow.
Change requires the conditions to gather and the structure to be ready to metabolize that change.
And the source points out that the structural readiness usually manifests in one of two ways. The first is the dramatic path, the one we are most familiar with from memoirs and movies. The spectacular breakdown, hitting rock bottom.
Right. The dramatic breakdown is the result of great suffering, major loss, or the complete, undeniable collapse of this person's previous way of functioning. The overgrading tools fail so spectacularly that the organism is forced to face reality.
It forces the ultimate question.
Yeah. Can I actually survive if I keep trying to overwrite this pain? The limit of the defense mechanism is totally exposed. It's a dramatic shift, and it's very easy to build a heroic narrative around it. My life fell apart, the illusion shattered, and then I understood.
But the text offers a second path, which is perhaps more common but rarely talked about because it doesn't make for a good movie script. Change does not have to be this heroic, agonizing crisis. Often it happens quietly, gradually, and almost invisibly through a process the source calls the reduction of internal noise.
Yes.
Hmm.
In a gradual change, there is no dramatic awakening, no sudden flash of enlightenment. Just through the process of ordinary life, maturation, or subtle shifts in environment, the background noise inside the nervous system naturally begins to decrease. The acute need for self-repair simply drops off.
It actually reminds me of a humming refrigerator in the background of a quiet room.
Oh, that's a great image.
You know that specific low-frequency sound? It's always there, vibrating, making you slightly tense, elevating your heart rate just a fraction, even if you don't consciously realize you're hearing it.
Yeah, it just sets your baseline anxiety a bit higher.
Right. If you want peace in that room, you don't achieve it by grabbing a baseball bat and violently smashing the refrigerator to pieces. You just slowly, gradually turn down the power. And then one afternoon, you're sitting on the couch reading a book, and you suddenly look up and realize the room has been completely quiet for days.
That captures the mechanics perfectly.
Hmm.
You didn't conquer the refrigerator through a battle of wills. The fuel supplying the noise simply decreased. In the context of desire, the underlying discomfort that once demanded you to override it with food or shopping or anger just doesn't pulse as strongly anymore. The physiological conditions that amplified the craving weakened over time.
You don't have to forcefully push the attachment away. It just stops arising. You look back at a situation that used to trigger an intense reaction and realize, I'm not reacting to that anymore. I can just sit with this minor feeling without needing to immediately overwrite it. It's an absence that is noticed after the fact rather than a victory achieved in the moment.
Because the felt conditions of the body have shifted. And this brings us to the ultimate takeaway from this somatic framework. We have to fundamentally stop treating desire and attachment as an evil force that has invaded us. They are entirely natural, mechanical responses to a bad internal feeling.
A person doesn't engage in their destructive habits because they are inherently weak, foolish, or broken. In that specific dysregulated body state, that movement toward a coping mechanism is completely natural. It's the organism trying to survive the moment. It is deeply, fundamentally human.
But, as the source rigorously warns, the fact that a mechanism is natural does not mean it is harmless. When these self-repair loops become fixed and rigid, we suffer immensely. We paint ourselves into a corner where our world becomes very small, dictated entirely by the need to manage our discomfort.
Yeah.
The key to breaking out is not to judge the loop, but to see it clearly for what it is. To look past the object we are craving and observe the underlying structure.
And that brings this entire deep dive full circle right back to you, our listener. The next time you feel that sudden, intense tractor beam pulling you, whether it's the urge to buy something you don't need, the impulse to pick an argument in a comment section, the drive to pour a drink after a hard day, or the desperate need to seek validation from someone who doesn't respect you, stop and try to drop the moral judgment.
Yes. Do not call yourself weak. Do not frame it as a failure of willpower.
Instead, look at the biological and psychological structure of the moment. Ask yourself the diagnostic question. What specific internal discomfort is my body trying to overwrite right now?
Ask yourself, why does my internal state feel so turbulent or empty that taking this action feels entirely necessary for my survival? Shift your focus away from the object you think you want and look directly at the internal feeling you are frantically trying to escape.
If we can learn to view our cravings not as signs of character failure, but as literal alarm bells, as mechanical signals alerting us to internal friction and dysregulation, we completely change our relationship to our own behavior.
We stop fighting the symptom and finally start looking at the root cause.
Which leaves us with one final thought for you to mull over, a sort of challenge based on the mechanics we've explored today. If our intense desires and stubborn attachments are essentially just alarm bells trying to force us to overwrite an uncomfortable internal state, What would happen if, the next time that alarm rings, you deliberately sat with that raw, unfiltered bad feeling for just 60 seconds, without reaching for your phone, without opening the fridge, without retreating into anger or your usual overwriting tool? What might that unoverwritten discomfort actually be trying to tell you about the reality of how you are living your life?